Welcome, students. This is your first unit test, Unit 1. And for your benefit, I will read the test to you. If you would rather, you can just go ahead and skip to each question. Yeah, I will read the test to you. I have some Regents type questions and then some other type questions. All right, so let's begin. Number 1. Which of the following statements best describes a hypothesis? A, the conclusion drawn from the results of an experiment is part of a hypothesis. B, a hypothesis serves as a basis for determining what data to collect when designing an experiment. C, a hypothesis is the process of making careful observations. D, the facts collected from an experiment are written in the form of a hypothesis. Question 2 refers to the following. An investigation of the cycling of environmental gases. A student placed water and bromethyl blue in each of 4 test tubes shown in the diagrams below. No additional items were placed in tube 1. A snail was placed in tube 2. An aquatic plant, Elodia, was placed in tube 3, and both a snail and an Elodia were placed in tube 4. The tubes were then stoppered and placed in bright light for 24 hours. What function did test tube 1 serve in this investigation? A, as a control. B, to detect the presence of glucose. C, to demonstrate the transparency of the solution. D, to determine the amount of gases in the water. The dotted line in the diagram below shows the path taken by an insect larva when it is placed in a round experiment chamber with light in the center. Blocks of wood are placed around the light, which cause regions of light and shade within the chamber, as shown. Temperatures are given for the light areas. Which one of the following statements best describes the movement of the insect larva? A, the larva does not move into light areas. B, the larva is attracted to light and moves steadily towards the light source. C, the larva is attracted to light but moves into shaded areas when it's too hot. D, the larva does not move into shaded areas. Question 4 refers to the following. A bee or not a bee? That is the question. Scientists have long been fascinated by the complex society of the bee. They have studied inherited behavior patterns such as dances and other methods bees use to communicate basic information. An investigation conducted by Dr. Harold Esch, a small microphone was placed inside a hive. When a scout bee was communicating information in the form of a dance, Esch heard a loud followed by a short beep, and then some of the worker bees flew out of the hive. Dr. Esch hypothesized the sounds reported the distance to the nectar supply as well as its quality and quantity. To test his hypothesis, Esch added a tiny loudspeaker to an artificial scout bee and placed the bee into the hive to repeat the dance that had been performed by the live scout bee. While conducting the dance, the artificial bee emitted the thurr sound accorded by Esch during his original observations. A ring of worker bees followed the performance with interest, but instead of flying out to seek the nectar, one of the worker bees flew over and stung the artificial scout bee. Smelling the odor of venom, the other bees withdrew. This happened each time Esch repeated his experiment. Dr. Esch eventually realized that he had neglected the short, chirping beeps that followed the scout's thurr sound. These beeps apparently made by one of the worker bees to indicate that the message was understood. When the scout bee hears the beep, she is supposed to stop dancing so the workers can come close to her and smell the odor of the nectar she has found. When the artificial scout bee was once again placed into the hive to perform the dance and stopped the dance after the first beep, the worker bees approached the artificial scout bee and then left the hive in search of nectar. As a result of his investigations, Dr. Esch discovered that A, worker bees can fly farther than scout bees. B, bees can communicate by means of sound. C, each hive has only one scout bee. D, artificial bees can be used to find food. 5. Which of the following statements about the use of independent variables in a controlled experiment is correct? A, the independent variable states the problem being tested. B, a different independent variable must be used each time an experiment is repeated. C, the independent variables must involve time. D, only one independent variable should be used for each experiment. What generalization can be made from this data in this graph below? Data table. 3 columns, sex, height, and weight. 2 rows, male and female. A, no relationship exists between height and weight. B, the height of an individual determines his or her weight. C, as height increases, weight usually increases. D, as height increases, weight usually decreases. 7, to compare the growth of plants grown under specific colors of light with that of plants grown under natural conditions, 4 groups of bean plants were grown under the light conditions indicated below. All other factors were kept constant. Group A, red light. Group B, green light. Group C, violet light. Group D, white light. In this investigation, which group of plants served as the control? A, B, C, D. Question 8. A water plant placed in bright light gives off bubbles. A student notes that placing the light in a different distance from the plant causes the rate of bubbling to vary. The student decides to design an experiment to investigate the effect of light intensity on the rate of bubble production. What is an appropriate control for this experiment? A, a plant is at a fixed distance from the light source. B, the addition of oxygen to the water. C, the use of blue light on some of the plants. D, a plant exposed to sunlight. Number 9, an experiment was set up to test the effect of light intensity on the rate of photosynthesis, as shown in the diagram below. Data were collected by counting gas bubbles released in a 5-minute period when the light source was placed at various distances from the experimental setup. The data are shown in the table below. The data table has 2 columns, distance from light in centimeters, bubbles in 5-minute period. The number of bubbles released when the light source is at a distance of 38 centimeters would be most likely closest to A, 22, B, 6, C, 13, D, 10. Question 10. The first trial of a controlled experiment allows a scientist to isolate and test A, a logical conclusion, B, a variety of information, C, several variables, D, a single variable. 11. Researchers performing a well-designed experiment should base their conclusions on A, the hypothesis of the experiment, B, a small sample size to ensure reliable outcome of that experiment, C, data from repeated trials of that experiment, D, results predicted before performing the experiment. Question 12. A student wondered if butterflies would show any differences in their wing color if, as caterpillars, they were grown in the dark or grown in the bright white light. Which of the following statements would be a possible hypothesis for this experiment to test this idea? A, results show that caterpillars kept in the dark and those exposed to bright light had the same wing color when they became butterflies. B, caterpillars exposed to bright white light will show more blue and green in their wings when they become butterflies than caterpillars kept in the dark. C, 10 caterpillars will be kept in the dark and 10 caterpillars will be exposed to bright white light and then allowed to develop into butterflies. D, will caterpillars kept in the dark have brighter wings when they become butterflies than caterpillars exposed to bright white light? 13. In an appropriately designed experiment, a scientist is able to test the effect of A, the hypothesis, B, scientific observations, C, multiple variables, D, a single variable. Question 14 refers to the following. A student set up an experiment to test the effect of the number of seedlings planted in one pot on the rate of growth. All conditions in the experiment were the same except for the number of plants in each pot. The results are shown on the graph below. The dependent variable for this experiment was A, average plant growth, B, the number of plants per pot. C, time in days. D, the amount of water per pot. Question 15 refers to the following. A student wanted to investigate the effect of light on the rate of ripening tomatoes. She set up 4 pots of the same size with identical amounts of soil, water, and type of tomato plants. Each plant was exposed to a different intensity of light as shown in the table below. There are 3 columns: plant, light intensity, and then a blank column. The independent variable in this experiment is A, the type of tomato plant, B, the color of tomatoes, C, light intensity, D, amount of soil provided. And that ends our Regent style questions. Now we will move on to our Mr. Kobach style questions. All right, here we are, part 2 of the test. These are the questions written by me. And again, I'll read them to you, and then you can answer them here on this EDpuzzle. Number 16, which of the following is not one of the 7 characteristics of life? A, regulation. B, cellular organization. C, breathing air. D, reproduction. 17, the basic unit of structure and function of life in all living things is A, an atom. B, a molecule. C, a cell. D, a tissue. 18. In the Miller-Urey experiment, the 2 scientists tried to recreate the conditions of the early Earth. They were hoping to see if those conditions could generate life. What actually happened? A, they successfully created life, like Dr. Frankenstein. B, they were successful at creating chains of amino acids. C, their whole experiment was a failure. Everything blew up. D, they managed to create the first living thing, from which all living things are now descended. Question 19. Proteins are considered the most important biomolecules because they, A, they do all the work, including enzymes and signal receptors. B, only living things contain proteins. C, they have been found in the deepest parts of the ocean. D, they are the simplest form of life on Earth. Question 20. In order to build proteins, cells have to string together long chains of subunits called A, Legos. B, polymers. C, amino acids. D, nucleic acids. Question 21. Which 4 elements make up 96% of the human body? A, E, I, O, U. B, C, H, O, N. C, H, E, X, E, A, R, N, E. D, glucose, proteins, lipids, and nucleic acids. What is it? Question 22. What is it that making bonds will store, but breaking them will release? A, energy. B, life. C, money. D, the Kraken. Question 23. Which of the following is the variable that is being tested in an experiment? A, independent variable. B, dependent variable. C, controlled variable. D, the control group. Question 24. When we experimented 3 different times with worms, which of the following was not an independent variable that we tested? A, the temperature of the soil. B, the amount of moisture. C, the amount of light. D, the type of music. Question 25. In the study of worms' reaction to music, the distance the worms traveled towards or away from music was an example of A, a controlled variable. B, the independent variable. C, the dependent variable. D, the manipulated variable. Question 26. When Mr. Kobach tested worms' reaction to different types of music, he collected both qualitative and quantitative data. Which of the following would be considered quantitative data? A. Worms hate country music. B. Worms traveled an average of 4 centimeters in 10 seconds when exposed to Justin Bieber. C. Worms love music with a deep thumping bass sound. Or D. Worms are all about heavy metal. Woo! Question 27. Which of the following properties of water allows it to be so sticky? A. It boils at 100 degrees Celsius. B. It is a polar molecule, allows for adhesion and cohesion. C. It makes up 65 to 75% of your body. D. It is only found on planet Earth. Oxygen and hydrogen molecules are covalently bound together in a water molecule. When individual molecules then stick to each other, what do we call that bond? A. Hydrogen bond. B. Covalent bond. C. Ionic bond. D. James bond. Question 29, refer to this image of an earthworm. Which best describes the part of the worm you are looking at in this diagram? A. You are looking only at the dorsal side of the worm. B. You are looking only at the ventral part of this worm. C. You are looking at the anterior part of the worm. D. You are looking at the posterior part of the worm. Question 30. Earthworms have a special part called the clitellum. What is the clitellum for? A. It senses light and heat. B. It senses sound, like an eardrum. C. It produces mucus to help keep the worm slimy. D. It is where the brain and hearts are located. And question 31. What does it mean when we say worms are hermaphrodites? A. They have more than one heart. B. They do not have any lungs. C. They have tiny hairs called setae all over their bodies. D. They can make both egg and sperm cells. And that ends our first unit test. Feel free to go back over and rewatch any part of the test that you might want to do. And then don't forget to make sure you let this play all the way through to the very end so it will be submitted.